So I'm ready with my last tomato, dipping it in the hot water. As it dips in the hot water for 30 to 60 seconds, the skins split, and then it's easy to peel off, hopefully. And taking a paring knife, getting the core out and the stem, peel the rest of the skin away. Quarter it, which means cut it into 4 pieces. Clean out a little bit of the center core. I want a little bit of juice in my tomatoes that I'm canning so that the chili has a little bit of start on a little bit of juice. But I don't like that white center core, so I kind of pull that out. Take out that last tomato, put it in the cold water, turn off my heat, and finish up. Sometimes the skin doesn't split, but it's been in there long enough. I know it's going to come off. And it pulls off easily. Now you do this for peaches too, if you don't want the skin, which you don't when you are canning peaches. But dipping it in hot boiling water just kind of softens that outer skin so you can easily pull it off. Cut it into 4 pieces. Clean out some of the seed bed and that center core. Now you notice that I have gloves on, and after doing all the tomatoes that I had, I could use my fingers, but I like to use the gloves so that my fingers don't get all red. Just kind of keeps my hands a little bit cleaner and ready for the next part as far as preparing my canning. So I'll wipe out the tomato mess here. Get rid of my cold water. And I didn't use this last tomato. Sometimes tomatoes have a little split in them, and anytime something has a split, there's a chance that there's some bacteria that could get into the tomato. Now this is a perfectly good tomato to slice and have on a hamburger or whatever you might want to have, but I don't really like to use ones that have been split for canning because I want to try to have as least amount of bacteria or microorganisms that have gotten into that tomato as possible. So now when we are doing this, I took my jars out of my dishwasher, and they are hot. I still keep my gloves on. I just wash my hands with my gloves on, because just because you have gloves doesn't mean that you don't need to wash your hands. My tomatoes are ready to pack. I want to work as fast as possible so that I am getting my tomatoes in the jar while they are hot, because I'm doing a cold pack, which means the tomatoes are cold and the jars are hot, and they need to stay hot, or when I put them into the water, they are going to burst. Now what I'm going to use are quart jars. That is what my chili recipe calls for, is a quart of tomatoes. And so I'll fill as many as possible. Never know how many. I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. I just use the packaged lemon juice. This is acidification. You never know exactly how much acid are in tomatoes. Tomatoes over the years have gotten more and more sweet. They used to be very acidic, so you could easily water bath can your tomatoes and you didn't have to worry. But now we want to make sure there's enough acid in there, so we'll add a little bit of lemon juice in there. And also, if you have yellow tomatoes, a lot of people like to grow yellow tomatoes, they're so low in acid, you actually need to pressure can them. What we're doing today, we're going to water bath can. Water bath canning gets to 212 degrees in the canner. That's enough to kill off a high acid, anything that might be growing on a high acid food, so that it's safe in the jar. If you were doing a low acid food, you would need a pressure canner. to get to 240 degrees and kill off the botulism spores and various other things that might be present in a low acid food. So I added a teaspoon of canning salt and 2 tablespoons of lemon juice for acidification. Now I'm packing the jar. I'm pushing it down with my fingers because I have the gloves on. It's just easier sometimes. I want to try to squeeze out bubbles. I want it to pack. I want some juice in there. That helps it can more efficiently. You don't want to can a dry product. And I'm squishing that down to a C. Now, as I watch my jar, I want to get it to a 1/2 inch to the top of the lid. That assures that I'm going to have a properly canned product as far as tomatoes. If I was canning jelly, because of the high sugar content, I would not need to have that much headspace. That's what that's called. The space between the liquid and the top of the jar is headspace. I want a 1/2 inch. And just to make sure there aren't any more air bubbles, I will take a knife and just kind of run it down into my jar, just to kind of aerate anything else. And then as I push it down, I want to make sure that it has a liquid on the top. So I'm going to fill the rest of my jars, and then we will be placing it into the canner. So now that you have all your jars filled with a 1/2 inch headspace, you want to keep those jars warm or they will break when you put them into the boiling water. You then wipe the edges off of the top so that the sealing compound seals nicely. You take the hot lids and set them on there. Again, I have gloves on, so it's easier to handle the hot with the gloves. Take the screw band and tighten it down. You don't want to use too much muscle, but you want it firmly in place. As you get them all snugly on, then they are ready to put in. We'll take the jar lifter and set the jars into the boiling water. There's a rack inside your boiling water to hold the jars in place and away from each other so the water can circulate around them. Boiling water is 212 degrees. Any microorganisms in a high acid food will be destroyed at 212 degrees. The water should be boiling when you put them in there. Put the cover on. Minnesota method says that pint size, which would be this size, need to boil for 40 minutes. And your quart size, which is this size, will boil for 50 minutes. At that point, in Minnesota, your jars are safe. Whenever you move, if you move away from Minnesota, you want to check with your extension service. Whatever state you live in, we would check Minnesota's extension service, and they will give you the proper times and temperatures for properly canning the food in that area. The higher the altitude, your temperatures are going to change. If you live high in the mountains, you may not be able to water bath can. You would have to only pressure can to get your water to a high enough temperature to safely preserve your food and kill off microorganisms. And that's the whole idea of canning food, so that you can keep the produce for a later time. So enjoy canning.